There's a moment in every journey where the power returns to you, not because you did something dramatic, not because you got revenge, and not because you played games, but because you stopped doing what was draining your power in the first place. You stopped chasing, you stopped waiting, you stopped performing, and the moment you made that decision, something in the energy shifted. The story began to rewrite itself, not from desperation, but from strength. Not from fear, but from clarity. You see, real change doesn't happen when you try harder to get someone to notice you. It happens when you wake up and finally notice yourself, the love, the peace, the attention you've been pouring outward. You start pouring that into you, and when that happens, the absence you once feared becomes the silence that they feel. That's the moment they start to miss you, not when you need them, but when you no longer need to be needed by them. You stop chasing and start choosing, and in that moment your identity begins to shift from someone needing approval to someone owning their power. Chasing often doesn't look desperate on the outside, but emotionally, it's an exhausting pattern. You wake up thinking about them, you rehearse every message, every response, every silence, you overgive, you overanalyze, you find yourself bending your own values just to keep the connection alive. But the more you chase, the more you signal energetically that you don't believe you are enough as you are. You signal that their presence is more valuable than your peace, and they feel that. People always feel that. But the moment you stop, truly stop, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You stop chasing when you realize your worth doesn't live in someone else's attention. It lives in how you see yourself, how you treat yourself, and how you show up when no one else is validating you. You start choosing peace instead of panic. You choose clarity instead of confusion. You choose self-respect over obsession, and this choice, it isn't loud, it doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like not sending that message you know will go unanswered. Sometimes it's deleting their number, not to be petty, but to protect your healing. Sometimes it's simply going to bed knowing that their silence doesn't define you anymore. That's what choosing looks like. Small, sacred moments where you put yourself first, not from ego, but from self-love. When you choose instead of chase, you start to feel free, and that freedom doesn't come from them returning. It comes from you returning to yourself. Suddenly, you're not checking your phone every 10 minutes. You're not waiting for them to remember your worth because you've remembered it for yourself. Your days begin to fill with you, with your focus, your passion, your people. You start building a life that isn't about getting someone back, it's about moving forward. And that movement, it's magnetic. Because when someone is used to being chased, they always feel the absence when it stops. They feel the quiet. They feel the void. But by the time they do, you've already shifted into someone who no longer needs to be seen to know she's valuable. This shift isn't meant to manipulate. It's not about playing games. It's about transformation. You no longer ask, why won't they choose me? You start asking, why was I trying so hard to be chosen by someone who didn't show up for me? And once you ask that question, everything changes. You rise not because you're trying to make them regret losing you, but because you've stopped losing yourself. That's the difference between chasing and choosing. Chasing says, I need you to validate me. Choosing says, I already validate myself. And when you do that, when you finally stop chasing, you become the kind of person who can't be ignored, not because you shouted louder, but because your silence now carries strength they can't forget. You stop explaining and start embodying, and that becomes a radical turning point in your healing. When you're stuck in the need to explain, you're still trapped in trying to be understood by someone who may never have had the capacity, willingness, or emotional intelligence to understand you in the first place. You go over every detail, every feeling, every expectation, hoping that maybe, just maybe, if you say it right, they'll see your worth, but they don't. Not because your words lack meaning, but because someone who refuses to listen will never hear you, no matter how loudly you speak. Explaining becomes a loop of frustration. It drains you. It disconnects you from your power. And worst of all, it sends a message to them and to yourself that you believe you still have something to prove. But the moment you decide to stop explaining and start embodying, your energy shifts from performance to presence. You no longer feel the need to justify your boundaries, your emotions, or your expectations. You no longer feel guilty for asking for the bare minimum. Why? Because now, instead of begging to be seen, you become someone who sees herself, and when that happens, everything changes. You begin to show, not tell. You don't announce your growth. You walk in it. You don't ask for someone to treat you right. You treat yourself right and let that set the standard. When you embody your worth, your actions become the loudest message you'll ever send. You no longer engage in emotional debates trying to get someone to validate your experience. You simply live aligned with your truth. If something doesn't feel good, you walk away. If someone disrespects your boundary, you enforce it, firmly and without apology. If you feel unappreciated, you don't fight for attention. You redirect your focus. And through these consistent actions, you teach others how to treat you, not through words, but through the way you treat yourself. The irony is, the more you stop trying to be understood, the more others start to notice. Your absence speaks where your explanations used to fill space. Your self-respect echoes where your people-pleasing used to make noise. You radiate a different energy, an energy that says, I don't need you to get it, I get me. That's when people start to feel the weight of what they overlooked, not because you reminded them, but because they feel the strength of your new silence, your new standards, your new sense of self. This shift doesn't make you cold, it makes you clear, and clarity is powerful. Clarity doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't wait for validation, it doesn't shrink to fit into other people's comfort zones. It simply is, and when you embody that, you become magnetic, not to everyone, but to the right people, the ones who value your peace, respect your boundaries, and don't need long explanations to understand your heart. Because once you stop explaining, you give yourself permission to just be, and in that being, you become undeniable, you stop waiting and start creating, and that's when momentum takes over. Waiting is passive. It's emotional quicks, and the longer you sit in it, the more it consumes you. You tell yourself you're just giving them time. You convince yourself that any day now, they'll realize your worth and return with clarity, love, and commitment. But deep down, waiting often isn't about patience, it's about fear. Fear that moving on will erase the chance of reconciliation. Fear that if you let go, you'll lose something that was never guaranteed in the first place. But the longer you wait, the more life moves on without you. And the real tragedy, you start to forget how powerful you are when you're not stuck in limbo. Creation is the antidote to stagnation. When you stop waiting, you begin to remember who you were before the heartbreak, before the pause, before the emotional chaos. You reclaim your mornings, you take back your focus. You stop checking your phone first thing in the morning hoping for a message. You start your day by checking in with yourself. You revisit dreams and ideas you shelved because you were emotionally consumed. You pour energy into building, not a fantasy with someone else, but a life that's rooted in your own truth, your own joy, your own vision. This isn't about distraction, it's about expansion. You create new routines, new goals, new standards. Maybe you start journaling every morning. Maybe you finally launch the project you've been thinking about for years. Maybe you sign up for something that challenges you, stretches you, forces you to grow. Suddenly, your mind is no longer looping in what-ifs. It's future-focused, it's solution-focused. You're not stuck in the past, you're designing the future. And while the past may still sting, it no longer controls your movement. You're not trying to prove a point to anyone. You're just proving to yourself that you're still capable of rising. People feel it when your life stops orbiting around them. They feel the void where your attention used to be. They notice the silence not because it's loud, but because it's focused elsewhere. And whether they return or not, it becomes irrelevant because you've already returned to your mission, your alignment, your power. You've remembered that your purpose is too great to be paused for someone else's indecision. You no longer build your identity around whether someone chooses you. You choose you every single day, and in that consistent act of creation, you begin to feel alive again. Not because someone came back, but because you did, and that is the most important return of all. You don't need someone else to unlock your future. You already have the keys. You stop waiting for love to find you, because love is already within you. And as you create more joy, more value, and more meaning in your life, you stop hoping for someone else to bring you peace, because you've already built it for yourself, brick by brick, breath by breath. Choice by choice, you stop reacting and start responding. And that shift reclaims your emotional power. When you're in reaction mode, you're constantly being pulled by the chaos of someone else's behavior. One message can change your entire mood. One moment of silence can send you spiraling. You overthink every word, every pause, every shift in tone. Your nervous system stays on high alert, waiting for the next emotional trigger. And without realizing it, you're no longer living. You're simply responding to someone else's emotional weather. That is not peace. That is not power. That is survival. And survival mode is no place to build a relationship, let alone a life. But the moment you shift from reacting to responding, you take your energy out of someone else's hands and put it firmly back into your own. You stop firing off emotional messages because of a wave of anxiety. You stop trying to interpret mixed signals like your sanity depends on them. Instead, you pause, you breathe, you create space between the trigger and the choice, and in that space you gain clarity. You begin to ask the right questions, not how do I get them to respond, but what do I need right now to feel grounded, calm, and aligned? And that right there, that question changes everything. When you start responding with intention, you become emotionally unavailable to dysfunction. You don't chase explanations, you don't beg for time or attention, you observe behavior and let it inform your decisions, not your emotions. You no longer seek closure from someone who's already shown you their pattern. You give yourself clarity, and from that place you respond with wisdom, you walk away with peace. You hold your boundary without drama, and you begin to attract a different quality of people. People who match your maturity, your calm, your depth. This shift also rewires the way your nervous system operates. You no longer live on edge, waiting for the next emotional high or low. You create internal safety. You become your own emotional anchor. And that steadiness, that groundedness, it's incredibly attractive. It radiates strength. It says, I feel deeply, but I am not ruled by emotional chaos. That energy sends a message far louder than any reaction ever could. I am not available for emotional games. And here's the most powerful part. When you respond rather than react, you stop trying to control things outside your power. You stop demanding understanding from someone who doesn't want to understand. You stop trying to make someone love you through your pain. Instead, you love yourself through your pain. You become the calm in your own storm, and that self-leadership, that emotional intelligence, is what turns heartbreak into breakthrough. It's no longer about who hurt you. It's about who you became because you chose to respond instead of lose yourself in reaction. That is real healing. That is real strength. You stop needing closure and start giving yourself clarity. And that, more than anything, sets you free. So many people stay stuck in heartbreak not because of what happened, but because of what was left unsaid. You replay conversations, imagine alternate endings, and wait for an apology that may never come. You tell yourself that if you just had one more conversation, one more chance to explain or hear the truth, then maybe the pain would go away. But closure from someone else is a myth when they couldn't give you honesty while they were in your life. Why would they suddenly provide it after they've left? The truth is, needing closure keeps you tied to the past. It keeps your power tangled in someone else's choices, timelines, and emotional limitations. You end up asking people who hurt you to also heal you, and that's not only unrealistic, it's unfair to you, because every time you seek answers from someone unwilling to give them, you reopen wounds that you were meant to heal with your own love. So, instead of asking, why did they do this to me? You begin asking, why did I wait so long for someone who couldn't meet me where I stood? And the answers you give yourself will always be more honest than the ones you hoped to hear from them. Giving yourself clarity means you stop waiting for explanations that never come. You look at actions, not words. You listen to patterns, not promises. You take the blinders off and see things for what they were, not what you wanted them to be. And in that honesty, you stop fantasizing about closure. You start creating peace, not because they fixed it, but because you did. You journal the truths you were afraid to admit. You process the grief you buried under distractions. You forgive not because they asked, but because your heart deserves to be unburdened. That kind of clarity is powerful. It doesn't numb you, it grounds you. You realize that closure was never theirs to give. It was always yours to claim. You get to decide when the story ends, not because the pain is gone, but because the lesson has been learned. You're no longer chasing a conversation that won't change the outcome. You're building a new chapter that no longer needs their voice to be complete. That is where your liberation lies, in self-chosen clarity, not externally granted closure. Once you give yourself that kind of truth, the need for external validation disappears. You trust your version of the story, you trust your experience, you trust that the pain meant something, and now you use it as a stepping stone, not a prison. The weight lifts, the fog clears, and you finally breathe again. Not because they came back to make it right, but because you moved forward and made it whole. That's what real closure looks like. It's not an ending someone gives you. It's a beginning you give yourself. You stop proving your love and start protecting your energy. And that's when you become truly untouchable. In the past, love may have felt like something you had to earn. Maybe you overextended, overexplained, oversacrificed, just to keep someone from walking away. You thought if you loved harder, gave more, stayed longer, they'd see your value. But all that effort, it was never about love. It was about survival, about trying to keep something alive that should have been let go. And the more you tried to prove your worth, the more exhausted and invisible you became, because real love never needs to be proven through pain, begging, or self-abandonment. But one day, something shifts. You get tired, not bitter, not angry, just tired of pouring yourself out into someone who doesn't pour back. You start asking new questions. What am I getting in return? Is this costing me more than it's nourishing me? And for the first time, instead of proving your loyalty, you start protecting your peace. You realize your energy is sacred. It's not meant to be scattered, drained, or wasted. It's meant to be honored. And the moment you start protecting that energy, everything changes. You set boundaries not to push people away, but to make space for yourself. You stop explaining why you need time, space, respect. You just require it. And if someone can't honor that, you no longer bend to keep them comfortable. You let them go. You stop showing up where your love isn't met with presence. You stop offering your heart to people who only love when it's convenient. That level of self-respect speaks louder than any declaration of love ever could. It shows that you're no longer trying to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. And what happens when you protect your energy? You glow differently, you move with intention, you stop performing, and you start embodying. People feel it. Those who once took you for granted begin to notice your absence, but by then, you're no longer available for crumbs. You've upgraded your standards. And now, only those who come with clarity, effort, and consistency can even get close to your world. You don't have walls up, you just have filters, because love without respect is just a transaction. And your heart deserves something deeper than that. You're no longer interested in proving your worth. You know your worth. You're no longer pouring into people out of fear. You're pouring into yourself out of love. And from that overflow, you begin to attract people who meet you at your level, who don't drain you, but match you, who don't need convincing, but commit willingly. You've stopped begging for love. You've become it. You've stopped chasing connection. You've become a magnet for what's real. And that is what happens when you stop proving and start protecting. You don't lose anything important. You gain everything that matters. When you stop doing the things that drain your power, chasing, over-explaining, waiting, reacting, needing closure, and proving your love, you shift your entire energy field. You go from being someone who seeks to be chosen to someone who chooses herself, and that's where real transformation begins. Your value is no longer up for negotiation. Your worth is no longer defined by how someone else responds to you. You don't beg for clarity. You embody it. You don't wait for love. You become it, and when that happens, something in the dynamic changes. You stop moving toward them, and they start feeling the emptiness where your energy used to be. They notice. Oh, they notice. The emotional pull they once took for granted is no longer there. The attention, the validation, the constant effort. They feel the loss. And not because you did something to manipulate them, but because you finally did something for you. You stopped leaking your energy into something that didn't nourish you. You stopped giving your power away in the name of love. And in return, you gained something far greater than their attention. You gained your freedom. Freedom is magnetic, not the kind that says I don't care, but the kind that says I care deeply, but I won't betray myself to prove it. That energy is undeniable. It draws people in not because you're desperate, but because you're whole, because you radiate peace, confidence, and calm. You no longer ask someone to see your value. You simply are your value, and anyone who can't see that, feel that, or respect that no longer has access to you, not out of anger, but out of alignment. This speech wasn't just about getting someone to miss you. That's the surface level desire, the deeper truth. It's about you becoming someone you never want to lose again. Someone grounded, powerful, emotionally intelligent, and deeply connected to her truth. When you show up like that, you don't just change your relationships, you change your life. You no longer settle for attention. You require consistency. You no longer cling to potential. You align with reality, and from that place you begin attracting everything that matches your new frequency. So whether they come back or not, you're no longer waiting. You've already moved, you've already grown, you've already evolved into a woman who doesn't just want love, she embodies it, and that, right there, is why the missing starts, not because they lost you, but because you finally found yourself. And from now on, that's the only version of you the world gets to meet. Empowered, clear, whole, unavailable for anything less than truthful, present, mutual love. That's your new standard, and you never have to prove it. You simply live it. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for choosing to listen, to grow, and to honor yourself in the middle of your healing journey. It's not easy to face the truth, to shift your energy, or to walk away from patterns that once felt familiar. But the fact that you're here means you've already taken the first powerful step toward becoming the strongest, clearest, and most aligned version of yourself. Remember, your love is not something to be proven. It's something to be protected. Your peace is not a luxury. It's a requirement, and your worth, it was never lost. It was simply waiting for you to stop looking for it in someone else's hands. Keep walking, keep choosing yourself, because every time you do, you make it harder for the wrong people to stay and easier for the right ones to recognize you immediately. If this message resonated with your heart, know that you're not alone on this journey. You're becoming the kind of person who leads with purpose, with power, and with emotional freedom. And that's something to be proud of every single day. Until we connect again, protect your energy, speak your truth. And never forget, when you truly return to yourself, the world around you starts shifting in beautiful, unexpected ways. Thank you, take care, and goodbye for now. You've got this.